Over the past few weeks and months, parati natin narinig yung term na social distancing. But more recently, more and more people are calling for China distancing or social and economic distancing from China. Well, this is not surprising dahil maraming tao nagagalit sa China because of accusations of suppression of evidence, of China covering up supposedly, and China not being very forthright about the origins and the progression of the virus in December and early January of this year. So marami nangagalit sa China at sinasabi nila siguro it's time to get out of China, hindi mag-invest sa China, not to politically engage with China, among other things. One leader that has been pushing in that direction is Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan. Recently po, Japan pushed for a stimulus package para yung economy nila ay hindi masyado mag-shrink. So now more and more countries ay gusto lumabas from China. The question is this a good thing? Ang economic term dyan is decoupling. Ibig sabihin, hihiwalay yung mga interdependent economies. So ngayon, ang pinag-usapan is decoupling from China. Now, this has actually been happening over the past few years, not only in the case of Japan's China Plus One strategy, but also in the context of President Trump's trade war with China, impositions of tariffs on China in retaliation for China's supposed predatory and abusive trade and investment practices. So nakita natin in the trade war between China and the United States over the past year or so, one big problem, and this is the first problem with the China decoupling strategy, yung so-called disruption in supply chains. Huwag natin kalimutan, we live in a globalized world. Ibig sabihin, when you look at a car or you look at a laptop, not all of it is made in one country. Some parts are made in Malaysia, some parts are made in Taiwan, some parts are made in China. The design is from the United States. So actually a lot of products that you see today, maybe it's written made in China, but actually China only made a part of it, yung tinatawag na value-added production. Dahil napaka-integrated ang production networks natin around the world, moving out of China and putting it somewhere else, hindi po madali na gumawa ng pabrika out of nowhere. And of course, relocation means new expenditures, new headaches, moving to new countries with limited resources or more complicated legal framework. So the first thing is potential disruption in supply chains. And that could push up the prices, so tayo mga consumers can suffer from that. The second factor is dahil interdependent ang mga economies around the world is that if mag-withdraw ka ng production from China at bumaba yung production of China, that will also have an effect on China's trading partners or yung mga countries na umaasa in terms of investments from China, in terms of tourism from China, in terms of infrastructure development projects from China, so on and so forth. So in short, if you hurt China, you could also hurt China's trading partners. At mahalaga ito para sa atin sa Pilipinas. So we consumers could pay actually a higher price if there's a disruption in supply chain. And the third, and perhaps the most important factor is this. Huwag natin kalimutan, nung panahon ng ating mga lolo at lola, there were world wars. In fact, yung Second World War, panahon ito ng ating mga lolos and lolas, that came after the so-called Great Depression. Ito yung time na nagde-decouple yung mga economies around the world at nagiging protectionist, naglalagay ng tariffs, nagwi-withdraw ng investments, minimanipulate yung kanilang currency to make exports cheaper to each other. So the strategy was beggar the neighbor, no? Zero-sum competition among different countries. Unfortunately, what happened after the Great Depression is dahil countries were trading less with each other and less dependent on each other, it became easier for countries to contemplate war against each other. And unfortunately, we had the Second World War not too long after the Great Depression. And as a result, also raised the possibility for conflict. Again, tayo dito sa Pilipinas, we could also be affected, not only as consumers, not only as recipients of Chinese investments and tourists, but we could also be affected if there's a conflict, military conflict between the West and China. Huwag natin kalimutan, last time I checked, we're still an ally of the United States, and our geography puts us in the middle of a potential war or conflict between those two major superpowers. So in short, maybe it's time for us to reconsider our engagement with China, our investments in China, and many countries are already moving in that direction. But we also have to be very wary about the unintended consequences and the negative effect of that on consumers, on trading and investment partners of China, and on peace and stability here in Asia. Ako po si Richard Haydarian. Stand with us, stand for truth.